Yeah, we are continuing our getting near the end of our Old Testament overview. A couple things we're going to do this morning. I want to look at the charts that I've mentioned several times and have not been having time to get to them, but I realize today I hesitate to say I'm ahead of schedule, but I'm not really on schedule either. Maybe slightly ahead of schedule because I built in some extra time there, and I'm really glad I did because otherwise I would be very much behind schedule. So a whole lot of time on those charts because I don't want to end up behind schedule, but at the same time I do want to look at those and then if I need to rush through, the time that I built in that I didn't realize I had there until I was looking back at my kind of planning schedule that I made today is I've built in a full entire class for a review at the end of period 12, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we may not, that's one of those things we don't have to do. If we run out of time, you've got those notes. I also built in a full class period for a kind of like a final exam that I've made into a PowerPoint so we can take it together via PowerPoint and bring the answers up as we go along. Again, great if we have time. If we don't, that's something that you've got those notes and we don't have to do that. It's not just the end of the world if we don't. So that said, I want to look at the charts today. They're also going to be not as thorough because I was reminded just this morning that I never went over the review. I told y'all I'm forgetful. I gave you a review for periods 1 through 7, and we never actually went over that. So we will do that this morning as well. I think probably most folks have got those. The only thing maybe anybody had any trouble with was the dates, but again, those are in your notes, but we will go over that. Again, I was reminded of that this morning, so I'm going to be taking this test with you somewhat. I did go ahead and get through a couple of pages. When that was brought to my attention, I said, oh, well, I better go take a look at that, and I pulled it up, and the only part I'm still working on is the putting the events in order, and that's always fun. But I really like the put events in order quizzes when you're dealing with Old Testament history because you want to see if you have a grasp of some of the bigger picture Old Testament overview stuff. Start throwing some events down on paper and try to arrange them in order. If you can do that, that's a big step toward having the big picture view of the Old Testament. Okay. So there's our 12 periods of Old Testament history. I was telling Brian I updated a slide, and I don't think I might have it. Sometimes the Dropbox doesn't update for some reason, but we'll see. Let's go ahead and review period number 10, and then if I don't have it, we'll go into the period 1 through 7, kind of a midterm exam, I guess, for lack of a better term. Period number 10 is called what? Judah alone. Of course, northern kingdom of Israel has fallen at this point, so it's just Judah alone. And it goes from what to what? It would be the fall of the northern kingdoms where it's going to begin, and it ends with, obviously, the fall of the southern kingdom. When did each kingdom fall? 722. 606, respectively. In the north, 722. Sometimes we say 721. I keep saying I'm not going to give all the years, but I just want to make sure we understand that. And, of course, we put the CA period for circa. That means about, approximately. These ancient dates are hard to nail down to an exact year, but we'll go with 722. And, we say 606, we sometimes say 586. Why? What's the difference? Yeah, you could say in one sense, Judah falls in 606 because Nebuchadnezzar comes in, he takes some captives away. We mentioned last week Daniel was in that group. He comes again somewhere around 596, and he takes more captives. And in that group would be Ezekiel. But then in 586 is the date we've got here, 586, 585, he comes and he finishes Jerusalem, we might say, just utterly. They are utterly destroyed. It's kind of like what happens with, it's similar in some respects to what happens in AD 70, when the Romans say, we're sick of it, we're sick of your rebellion, you won't follow the rules, you are a conquered people, I don't know when you're going to get that through your head, you won't do what you're told, and so since you won't do what you're told, you keep wanting to, they would sometimes, you had the zealots who wanted open uprisings. You had some of the other people that wanted to be a little sneakier with their rebellion against Rome, but it's just constant. And Rome finally in AD 70 says, you know what? We're done with this. And so we are going to crush you. And you will not be uprising or rebelling anymore. And buddy, let me tell you, they did. And that's kind of what happens here with Nebuchadnezzar. The first time he comes in 606, he takes some captives. You're my puppet king now. I'm in charge. You play by my rules, and you'll do okay. You can call yourself king. I don't really care. Just send your taxes and do what I tell you to. And so what do? They rebel. Oh, hey, Egypt, could you come over here and help us? And we don't want to be under Nebuchadnezzar. Hey, there's some gold in the temple. I could give you some of this gold. Come over here and help us out. And Nebuchadnezzar says, you think I'm not going to find out about that? He finds out. He's upset. Comes again around 596. Takes more captives. Get it through your head. For good measure, I'm going to take some vessels from your temple. I'm in charge. And it continues. And then finally, when you get to, 586, Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm done with this. You're not going to rebel anymore. Because you're anybody of any kind of importance at all is going to Babylon. And I'm going to destroy your city, going to break down your walls. I'm going to burn your royal palace and any important palaces in your capital city. I'm going to take your temple. I'm going to destroy that. I'm going to burn it. I mean, it was utter. So that's why we give those different dates. And sometimes, I point that out a lot because sometimes people get confused because they say, well, if, Judah fell in 586 and we say the captivity is 70 years, but they come back in 536, well, man, that's only 50 years. But we date the captivity from when he first took captives. But we often say the fall of the southern kingdom happened in 586 because that's when the capital fell utterly and the temple was burned, the walls are broken down, and so on. So keep that in mind when you think about period 10 versus period 11 and when they start and begin, or started and began. The king of Babylon who conquered Judah. Nebuchadnezzar, we've been talking about him several minutes there. Two best kings of Judah. Hezekiah and Josiah, in that order. I think Hezekiah, then it was Manasseh, Ammon, and Josiah, is that right? I forget the order, and I don't have my chart on here anymore. But anyways, I think there were like two kings between them. Who prophesied the length of the captivity? Jeremiah. And how long did he say it would be? 70 years. The false prophets kept saying, nothing's going to happen. God's going to turn Babylon back, and you're going to be fine. Jeremiah kept saying, no, you're going into captivity. No, don't worry about it. Well, then they go into captivity. And you know what the false prophets turn around then and say? What did they say then? Oh, well, I mean, yeah, so we're in captivity. Big deal. It's just going to be a little bit. Don't worry. Don't get comfortable. We'll be home soon. God's bringing you home, which is exactly what they wanted to hear. And that's what false prophets do, even to this day. False teachers are kind of infamous for telling people what they want to hear. So don't worry about it. God's going to bring you home. Won't be long. And Jeremiah kept saying, no, settle in, plant your gardens. You're going to be there a while. It's going to be some time, 70 years. So Jeremiah prophesied that on at least 2 different occasions in the book of Jeremiah. When were the first 2 carryings away? We mentioned this, and I try not to stress about dates because I know some people are good with dates and some people are not. And if you struggle with dates, it just feels like a constant struggle. But, if it helps you to write those in your Bible or on a note somewhere. But, I tell people don't worry as much about the dates as the information. So the first 2 carryings away, I'll go ahead and just give those to you. We've mentioned 606, somewhere, approximately 606, and 596. Name somebody taken in the first carrying away. Daniel. And in the second? Ezekiel. Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed. Why? Disobedience is the overarching answer. If we want to get a little bit more specific, we could say, what else? Pride is definitely talked about. There are 2 I words. Idolatry is a big one. Remember, we talked about Manasseh. He outdid the heathen with his idolatry.
God made a promise back in Deuteronomy through Moses. If you do right, you'll stay in the land. If you don't.
And yeah, that's a good point. This goes all the way back to Deuteronomy. Moses made that, or God through Moses made that promise. Do right, the land's yours. Do evil, and the land will, he actually uses very graphic language to say the land will vomit you out. So yeah, idolatry. The other I word I was thinking of is impenitence. We talked about this last week, reading at the end of 2 Chronicles, where God sends prophets rising up early, calling them back, and they just won't come back. They just refuse. Insurrection, yeah, that's another I word we could add there. Before long, we'll have a sermon here, Brother Chris. There are all these, and it's also interesting when you study several passages related to their captivity. Several times he says that the land may enjoy its what? Sabbaths. There's an indication, and this gets us off on another study, and I don't want to get too far down that path, but there's an indication in several places that they never kept. We know everybody talks about the Sabbath, and that's the 7th day of the week, what we would call Saturday. They were to rest on the Sabbath. They often didn't keep the Sabbath either, by the way. But there was another Sabbath, and that came every 7th year. And what did God say to do on the 7th year? Let the land rest. Now listen, if you're an Israelite in those times, where do you get your food? You don't go to Walmart. You don't go to Kroger or Publix. You don't have that option. You plant it, and you harvest it. You've got barley. You can make, we've talked about this in our Biblical History Center / Geography / Archaeology class about barley was kind of the poor man's bread. You can make bread out of that at a much cheaper rate than with wheat. But they would do wheat. You save that maybe for company or for, special occasions or something if you don't have much money. But you've also got barley, grapes, and the figs and all this. But here comes the 7th year, and you just say, okay, it's the 7th year, so we don't plant anything. And you can imagine your young child comes up and says, Daddy, what's the question? Why are we not planting barley, Daddy? Well, it's the 7th year. The land lies rest. The next is, if your children are anything like mine, Daddy, how are we going to eat? How are we going to make bread? You're not planting any wheat? What are we supposed to do? It took some faith. That's my point. But I'm just racking my brain here and trying to think. I don't remember ever reading of the Israelites letting the land rest. And by the way, there are agricultural studies that show the benefit of that. We don't have to do that now. Why? Yeah, science. I mean, we have all these nutrients you can add into the soil, right? And so you can keep planting over and over and over. But you will, without doing something, adding something, you will strip the land of its, nutrients after a certain amount of time. And the study shows right around that 7th year. So pretty interesting. But it took some faith. And for the most part, like I said, I may be missing one. I'm trying to think. I can't recall an occasion of reading about them keeping it. But there's several times when it said of the captivity that God removed them from the land that the land may enjoy its Sabbaths. And interestingly, 7 times 10 is 70. I don't think there's any big significance to that, and I'm not trying to, if we do this numerology, it's just it's a multiple of 7 there because of the Sabbath of rest for the lamb. But an interesting thing there. But idolatry, impenitence, and again, the overarching reason was just disobedience. Whether you want to bring it down to idolatry, a refusal to come back when God calls them, a refusal to heed the warnings in Deuteronomy, a refusal to keep the Sabbaths of the land, or even the weekly Sabbath, it all comes down to disobedience. They didn't follow God, and just like God warned them, the land vomited them out. Jeremiah 29, verse 11, we said there's a context here. Sometimes people quote this out of context, but he says to the inhabitants of Judah who are going into captivity, you're going to come home. You're going to have to take your lumps, as we say sometimes, but then I'm going to bring you home. For I know the thoughts that I think towards you, saith the Lord. Thoughts of what? Thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. That expected end, by the way, is what? Think big picture. Salvation for all mankind. It's Jesus. It's the Messiah. That's what this is all working toward. We've mentioned that several times. That's the expected end. This is not, and I'm not saying the concept's not in Scripture, but sometimes this is quoted like, to somebody who maybe they're struggling. I don't know what to do with my life, or I'm struggling with a particular decision. Maybe it's to go to this school or to go to this school or to take this job or to take that job. And sometimes people will quote this verse and they'll say, God knows the thoughts that he has towards you, as if God's got your life mapped out. That's not what that's saying. It's to a specific people in a specific context, and it's expanding that. There is application, but the expanded application is towards salvation for all mankind. And so, God, we've often pointed out when it comes to, everyday type decisions, does God have a plan for you? Yes. His plan for you is to become more and more every day like his son. Beyond that, you can go to this school, you can go to that school. And if you continue in that context to grow more and more like Jesus, did I choose God's plan for me if I go here? Yes. Did I choose God's plan for me if I go here? Yes. As long as I'm growing closer to him and more like Jesus. That is God's plan. God doesn't have it set where, he wants you to take this job, and if you take this job over here, well, you're just never going to be happy, because that's not God's plan. Or to marry this person, and if you marry anybody else, this is meant to be. No, the Bible doesn't teach that. What God wants is for us to serve him faithfully. Now, it may be that this job over here offers you a chance to serve God a lot better and a lot more faithfully. I was talking to somebody just recently about a Christian who is now unfaithful. And they look back and they said, I think it was this job that took them away. It was actually here at Bremen, took them away. And a lot of travel, a lot of time away from family, a lot of time away from church, and sometimes and in that case it did. It was a detriment spiritually. But, God doesn't have a particular thing mapped out for each person. All right, so that's our review of period number 10. Now, here's one of these charts. I know some folks are not internet-type people. Maybe you just don't do the internet. Maybe you are not tech savvy and maybe you get on the internet some, but you have trouble finding these. So here's what I want to do. I've got some copies of these that I can make, but if you want a copy of these, raise your hand and I'll make a count. Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So maybe make, Brother Martin, do you mind? They're in Joyce's office on that copier. So make them on there so they'll do them in color and they'll come out a lot better. So let's say 7 copies. And the reason I do that is because the color copier, when you're using toner to get color, it costs a lot more per copy. And so I don't want to waste any of those if I don't have to. So, all right, so he'll get those. And in the meantime, can you see that? Probably hard to see from the back, isn't it, Mike, the smaller print? Can you see it okay? Cody, what about you? You can see it okay? You're young, though. So, not that you're not, Mike. I'm Cody's younger. So, Jacob, what about you? I mean, everybody knows you're old. What? I better be careful with that because Jacob's younger than I am. So, but you can you see it back there, Jacob? Okay. All right. So, this is we've talked about these. So again, I'm going to go through them a little quickly, but I did want to cover the United Kingdom, 1053, 933 BC. 3 kings reigned. Each of these for 40 years, Saul, David, and Solomon. And then, of course, it goes to the divided kingdom. That's 931 to 722. And then, you see the northern kingdom there after the kingdom divides. That'll be the 931 to 722. You got 10 tribes, capitals in Samaria, 19 kings. None of them were good. They all were idol worshipers. They all served the calves there in Dan and Bethel that Jeroboam, the first king of the northern kingdom, set up. 8 kings either assassinated or committed suicide. This kingdom lasted 210 years, thereabouts. 135 years less than the southern kingdom. They were conquered by Assyria. And really more like 721, 722 is the fall there. There was some ongoing strife, but I guess that's why he's got that range there. And then the southern kingdom, 931 to 586-ish BC. You've got Benjamin and Judah. The capital was Jerusalem, of course. There were 20 kings. That's counting Athaliah the usurper, I would say 19. At least 7 were considered good in God's sight. We talked about that as well. Sometimes one would start off good and he would go bad. Sometimes start off bad and he would repent and go and be a good king, as with Manasseh. 135 years longer than the north, conquered by the Babylonians, 586 BC, 70-year period of Babylonian captivity. And then Persia, the Medes and the Persians are going to conquer Babylon in 536. And there are 3 periods of return from Babylon to Jerusalem. I'm not even going to cover that right now because that's going to be under period 12. So you can see that where the 3 different returns and what they do. They rebuild the temple, or at least begin to rebuild the temple. They restore the law. They restore the walls of Jerusalem. Now I'm going to go to chart number 2, turmoil in the divided kingdom. Long and continued war between Israel and Judah and during this divided kingdom period. This is pretty interesting over here on the left, the top column, top part of the left here. First 50 years, the northern kingdom was harassed by Judah under Omri's house. I think he's got a typo there. I think he means to say they harassed Judah, not harassed by Judah. They harassed Judah under Omri's house, because Omri was king in the north. The next 40 years, they were quite prosperous under Omri's house. And then the next 40 years, they're brought very low under Jehu and Jehoahaz. And then that following 50 years reached its greatest extent under Jeroboam II. And those last 30 years were pretty much anarchy, ruin, and eventually captivity. Southern kingdom, first 80 years, they were pretty prosperous, growing in power. And then there's a lot of disaster in those next 70 years. Baalism gets introduced. And then you have a period under Uzziah where they reach their greatest extent. They become a tributary to Assyria under Ahaz. And then under Hezekiah, they regain their independence because Hezekiah turned to God, as you recall. We talked about that. And then those last 100 years, I'm not sure. That may be a typo. I'd have to go sit down and do the math, but I can't do that math in my head. But Bob, you've studied that chronology a lot. Is it 100 years that they would have been a vassal of Babylon? I think that's. I don't think that's. I think that's way too long, isn't it? Seems like it. Anyway, you may just want to put a mark there. We would have to take a look at that. Like I said, I'd have to sit down and do some research, but that seems long. The relation of the two kingdoms to each other, again, first 80 years or so, they seem like they're constantly at each other's throats. They're a lot like siblings, divided kingdom. They're very much brethren, and so like siblings, they kind of go back and forth with each other a lot. And then there's a period of about 80 years or so, peace with each other, and then the last 50 years or so, they just kind of periods of war and periods of not so much peace, but just kind of leaving each other alone. Or sometimes, like the northern kingdom when they're dealing with Assyria, you got bigger fish to fry, so you're not worried about your brethren over here that you ordinarily might be picking on or aggravating or getting after, but you got bigger fish to fry because they're dealing with Assyria. Sometimes the same, vice versa in the southern kingdom. But the northern kingdom, 9 dynasties, family lines. You've got, he lists those there, but 19 kings in all. The average reign was only like 11 years. That's pretty amazing. 8 of the 19 kings died by violence. So you have 9 dynasties in the north. In the south, 1. They're all descendants of David. And you see that there in the next little section, 1 dynasty, David. The one exception was the usurper Athaliah, but again, wouldn't really put her in the category of the king. She usurped the throne, managed it for a few years, and Jehoiada the priest comes along and he helps Joash to become king at a very young age, and then he helps Joash rule as a boy. And Joash was a good king until when? Until Jehoiada died. And it's really sad. He ends up killing Jehoiada's son, the man who made him king and helped him rule when he was just a kid. And he was like 7 years old when he became king. We think boy king, and we usually think of Josiah, right? 8 years old, but Jehoash, or Joash, same name for, different name for same person, was actually 7 years old when he became king. And this man helped him in so many ways, protected him while Athaliah is looking for any of the royal seed to destroy them. And then when Jehoiada's gone, he allows people to influence him, and he becomes wicked and actually kills Jehoiada's son. It's just unconscionable. So, back to the southern kingdom, average of about 16 years per reign. So some of them had pretty short reigns as well. We talked about that when we looked at our little chart. All the kings of Israel served the calf. The worst served Baal. The calves, of course, we're talking about are there in Dan and Bethel that Jeroboam the first set up. Most of the kings of Judah served idols. That's a sad statement, but it's true. Most of them, not all, but most, served idols. A few of them served Jehovah. Some bad kings were partly good. Some good kings were, of course, partly bad. Before I go to the prophets chart, I'm about to forget again the review. Let's look at that real quick. And if you don't have it, don't worry. My PowerPoint didn't update for some reason, but that's okay. I'll just read through these. If you've got your paper, I'm going to give you these dates real quickly on section number 2. I'll give you these quickly because, like I said, I know dates are sometimes, some people are good at them, some people are not. So I'll give those to you. They're in the notes, but David became king of Israel, 1011 BC. Israel entered the land of Canaan, 1407 BC. Now, number 3 under the dates, you should know just from today, if nothing else, the southern kingdom was destroyed by Babylon, 586 BC. The Israelites left Egypt and crossed the Red Sea. That's 1447 BC. And by the way, when you get into these 1000 or plus BC, it gets real approximate. Northern kingdom destroyed by the Assyrians. That would be 721 BC or 722. The division of the kingdom after the death of Solomon, that'd be around 931 BC. All right, so that gets all of our dates. Now, section 3 here says, give 3 reasons why Christians ought to study the Old Testament. We have 6 or 7 of these, so go. Learning, Romans 15:4. We, through patience, comfort the Scriptures. To see how God helps His people. It leads us to Christ. That's the big one there. Don't ever lose sight of that. It leads to Christ. Also, you're following the unfolding of God's scheme of redemption. One of the big questions that mankind has and wants answered is, where did I come from? That's just one of the inherent questions of humanity. Where did we come from? And so-called science would seek to answer this, some kind of ridiculous answer after they sit there and tell you. It's kind of ironic to me that they'll drill it into your head. A law of science is the law of biogenesis, and laws are different from theories, and they're different from all this. Law is always the way it is. Law of biogenesis. Life comes only from life. And then you start talking about origins, and they say, well, somewhere way back, billions of years ago, there was this explosion, this bang, and life somehow came out of that. Whoa, you just want to say, time out. You said life only comes from life. Oh, but there was this one exception. But you said a law has no exceptions. You see, round and round we go. But if you want to know about the beginning, where did we come from, ask the one who was there. There's only one being who was there. That was the Creator, Jehovah. So the Old Testament tells us about the beginnings of mankind, civilization, marriage, and so on. So many beginnings detailed just right in the book of Genesis alone. So that's a huge thing. The scheme of redemption, pointing to the Messiah, that's a big deal. Examples, good and bad examples, right? We have examples that we can follow, with understanding it's a different covenant, but following their example of obedience and submission to God. But there are also bad examples that we don't want to follow. It helps us to more fully understand the need. I'll give you one example. 1732, Jesus says, remember Lot's wife. He's talking about, staying the course, being faithful. That makes no sense if you don't understand that Lot's wife, what'd she do? She looked back. They're fleeing Sodom and Gomorrah, and she looks back, turns into a pillar of salt because she looked back. So Jesus is saying, keep your eyes on the prize, so to speak. Don't look back. That's exactly what I had next. Thank you, Miss Tammy. We learn God's nature and His attributes. We've studied, all through 2020. We did at least one lesson a month on an attribute of God, and a lot of those we went to the Old Testament and learned about. It's like Psalm 90, God's eternality, especially man's finite nature compared with God's infinite nature. But a lot of those, you learn about that great Old Testament passages. And then finally, I have, it helps to, and I think Ms. Joyce kind of touched on this, build faith in God and His Word. All right, 3 promises God made to Abraham and the fulfillment of each. A great nation, great land, and promise of a seed, a descendant. And the fulfillment, the land, Canaan land or Israel or Palestine, promised land, however you want to word that. And the nation, Israel, and the seed. Really a dual fulfillment of that one, right? Because in the immediate sense, it's Isaac, but it's ultimately looking toward Christ, Galatians 3:16. But you can't get to Christ without Isaac. I say that just because years ago I heard some brethren, they were sound brethren, but borderline radical position that they were taking. Scriptures could have a dual fulfillment. And what it was is somebody had taken a prophecy and said it had a dual fulfillment, and they were taking it to teach something that was wrong. And it was proven wrong by other passages of Scripture. But what this brother did was and he had some others that were with him, they ran so far from that, as we often do, that they ran to another extreme and said, no Old Testament prophecy can have a dual fulfillment. Well, that's crazy. Because here is one. In your seed, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's talking about Isaac in the ultimate sense. In the immediate sense, but Jesus in the ultimate sense. But you don't get to Jesus without Isaac. So there's really a dual fulfillment there. And we could look at others as well. But Three important events that took place at Mount Sinai. We gave 5. What are 3 of them? The law. They received the law. That included the 10 Commandments, not exclusively 10 Commandments. That's 1. What else? They worshipped a golden calf. They gave up on Moses and started worshiping a golden calf. He goes down and breaks the tablets and has to go back up and receive others. What else? They made and built the tabernacle. They set that up. And another one, the next one comes right in that same context. Sort of the grand opening. Kind of gets a little bit of rain on their parade, because what happens? They're worshiping there the first time. Think Leviticus, around chapter 10. Nadab and Abihu. They offered strange fire, and they were consumed by fire from heaven. And then one more event. It's number 5. This is number 5 in our list. If we were numbering these, it would be number 5. They numbered the people. That's right. I feel like doing sometimes when we're doing Bible time with the kids, I'll do stuff like that and try to give them hints, and it's just. Last night we were in the van and had the 2 boys, and I'm saying, how many spies went down to Canaan land? And we sang a little song. 12 spies went down to Canaan's land. 10 were bad and 2 were good. They know the song. How many spies went down to Canaan land? 2. Another one says, no, 10. 10 were bad, 2 were good. So we could say 10 and 2, or we could say, just sing the song. How many spies went down to Canaan land? 10. Let's sing the song. So we did. 12 spies went down to Canaan's land. How many spies went down to Canaan land? 2. Just like, that's all I can do to keep the van in the lane and not just go crazy. We did finally figure it out, and Austin, when it came to him, he's just screaming, 12, 12, 12. It's the song 12. Yeah, that's why I was wanting you to sing it, buddy. Those are always interesting times. When did Joshua figure it out? Oh, I got you. Yeah, it took Joshua a little longer. He was like, oh, good job, Austin. You gave us the answer. Yes, sir. No. Nation, land, seed. Yes, sir. And repeated several times. He repeats it to him in Genesis 22, kind of a condensed form, 22:18, and then 26 maybe to Jacob, or maybe that's. But it's repeated to Isaac and Jacob, and then various ones throughout the rest of the Old Testament. But those are kind of the main instances where you see it is in Genesis. And by the way, that's kind of number 4 here. Well, who are the Israelites? The most brief, accurate answer. Descendants of Jacob. Descendants of he was surnamed by God Israel, which means Prince of God, or he who prevails with God. Might even say descendants of Abraham, God's chosen people. All those short answers certainly describe that. The 4-part cycle we see repeated over and over in Judges. Yeah, we came up with 5 based on Jimmy's notes that he shared with us. Sin, servitude, supplication, salvation, and silence. That's it. Name an Old Testament example that shows God can give something to his people by grace, yet they must do something in order to receive that free gift. Manna. Jericho is the one that I had in my notes. There are really a lot of these, right, that we've covered. Jericho is, I don't know if it's the first, it's one of the first, one of the early ones at least coming into the Promised Land. The whole Promised Land, we could say that too. They had to go. Did they earn it? No. It's still a free gift of God. But God says, here's what you do. Same thing with Jericho. March around the city once a day, 6 days, 7 times on the 7th day. Blow the horn, shout. The walls come tumbling down. What's the role of the judges that God raised up? Number one role. Don't forget it. They're champions. And their number one job is to inflict what? Casualties on the enemies of God. Before Samuel was anointed king, who was God? I gave you the answer. Who was Israel's king? It was God. Why wander for 40 years in the wilderness? And why 40 years? 1 year for each day that the spies were gone spying out the land. How long were they at Mount Sinai? About how long? About 1 year. During the period of the judges, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. All right, do not let me forget. We'll finish that because I know, like I said, somebody reminded me today, said, hey, I want to make sure I got my answers right. We'll finish that. We got another page or so to go. And then I do want to cover some more of these charts. The prophets ones, we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on those, but they're pretty self-explanatory. But I did want to just look through those because, like I said, I figured out I have a week or so to play with. So thank you very much. We will have a short break for our worship, and then we'll enter into worship. So thank you. I appreciate it. We'll pick up right there, Lord willing, next week.